Welcome to the Directors UK podcast. We're the professional association for UK film and TV directors. No matter the format, no matter the genre, our featured directors share their approach to the craft. We hope you enjoy.
Tonight we have in conversation Olaide Sadiq and Toby Trackman on Grenfell Uncovered. I'm really pleased that we've been able to host the screening tonight.
Thanks for coming out this evening and supporting Olaide's film. I hope you've all had a chance to sort of absorb what you've just seen and kind of catch your breath. I know it's an emotional experience watching that film. So first of all, I just wanted to say congratulations on a great piece of work.
Thank you.
Which I'm not sure if everybody knows this is actually your first, not only first feature documentary, but your first experience as director as well. Yeah. I mean, tell me about that, Jenny. I mean, how did you get there?
It came up as a bit of a shock. When I was first sort of spoken to about it was at the beginning of last year or end of 2023. And I initially met with James Rogan, and it was meant to be just like a catch-up coffee. And then he was talking about what he had on his plate, which if anyone knows James Rogan, there's a lot of things on his plate all the time. And so he was just kind of talking at me about different things he was doing. And he said, oh yeah, and might have this commission with Netflix, and it's a Grenfell doc. And so I'm just speaking to directors or trying to think of directors. And I said, oh, okay, how's that going? And he's like, oh, that's why I'm here with you. And I was like, what? And I was very taken aback. And he's like, oh, what do you think of that? And I said, well, is this an interview or is this a coffee? And he said, well, it can be whatever you want it to be. And so I was a bit taken aback. But then we started talking about it. And he said, I'd worked with Rogan before, and we spoke briefly about doing a first cut. And I sort of dabbled in that a little bit, but I was kind of at capacity with other work. So I didn't really see that through. And then, so when we had the coffee, he was like, what do you think about Grenfell? What do you think about directing? And I was a bit kind of, well, that's quite big for first film and then for Netflix and everything else. And then he just had to think about it, and he said he'll mention me to Netflix and see if they're warm. And then if they're warm, I've got to do a vision and write a statement and stuff like that. And then that's what I did. And I didn't think I was going to get it, actually. So I sort of just entertained the process because it was interesting to know kind of how directors come on board on things. And then when I got it, my Zach Sandy called me, and I was very shocked. I sort of said, oh my God, yeah, in a moment. But then afterwards, I was like, oh my God, I need to like talk to my therapist and everybody else. But because I was really like, whoa, it's actually happening. And then I sort of started, and went from there. So not expected, but I was really something I wanted to do eventually, but I wasn't sure it was going to come as soon as it did. So, but I'm really glad it did.
And when James came to you and said it's about Grenfell, I mean, obviously there's been quite a few, kind of outstanding films about it in the past. How did you kind of approach that in your original kind of director's vision? What was the thing that made you think, okay, this is what I'm going to say?
Yeah, because when he first said it, I sort of said I sort of asked him what was new to say, because I was surprised. I'd watched a lot of Grenfell projects. I'd followed the story for a long time. I'd actually seen the play 6 months prior, so I'd followed Grenfell's story for a while, and I felt like I knew a lot, and I felt like a lot's been done. So, and he sort of said, well, that's the director's job. So it sort of like worked that out as well. And he said, oh, you should read the deck, and there's a lot of things to bring to the surface, which when I read it was true. And I did my own sort of digging as well. But I think it's very easy sometimes to sort of replicate what's just been done and maybe make it more expensive version of it, and that's what we didn't want to do. So I think it was kind of trying to strike that balance as a team. We're trying to strike the balance of having that kind of emotion in the heart still in it, because I feel like I don't think with Grenfell it's appropriate to not have that. I think it's such a raw story. It's still so fresh. People are still, as you guys would have seen, still very affected. So we kind of still wanted to have that in, which I know had been done a lot. But then balance that with what we thought was new journalism, new revelations, things people might not know, and sort of striking that balance. And that's kind of how we set about going about it. And that's kind of what I kind of said I wanted to do as well. And then I hope that's what we did. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to talk a little bit later about how you kind of wove those different elements together. You know,
Yeah.
the sort of the personal, emotional story and the journalistic side. But when you were thinking about the sort of the director's vision at the beginning, as a new director, were you finding that you were thinking about the story elements, or were you thinking, oh, I can see how this might look, or like what were you sort of like led by in your own thinking there?
Honestly, I didn't know what director vision was, so I wasn't led by anything. I sort of Googled what is it, and went from there. And I think I did it wrong at first. I felt like I was back at uni actually. It was like writing an essay, and I felt like, okay, this is not what I think directors do. So I wasn't sure if I was doing it properly, but I felt like I was trying to. I don't shoot. I've shot before, but I wouldn't ever say I could shoot. So I didn't have the technical language. I thought, was it meant to have technical language, or was it meant to have kind of strictly editorial beats and stuff like that? So I wasn't quite sure how I was meant to put it together, to be honest. And I think not being sure kind of just led me to do, I'm just going to write whatever, and hopefully it'll make sense. I asked a couple of people if they've done one before, and they're like, yeah, you just got to say X, Y, and Z. And everyone made it sound really quick and easy. And I thought, well, this doesn't feel quick or easy. So it felt really stressful. But actually, so I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to weave things together. But I knew, because I think the story was so fresh in my head from seeing the play 6 months prior, I felt like I knew what could be interesting scenes, what could be good recon. There was things that the play did that I think I hadn't seen on broadcast before. And that was sort of stuck in my head. And I knew a lot of I didn't know personally, but I knew a lot of the contributors, or what their stories could be. I was familiar with some of their stories, and I felt okay, I can see how we could sort of visualize that in a sensitive and appropriate way, but also bring the corporate stuff to life, because I think with Grenfell there's just so much of the corporate side to it. It's a very big corporate story, and how we sort of make that feel interesting and make that feel visual and appropriate for Netflix as well. So that I did understand. So that's what I kind of said. And also then when I felt like I made sense of what the director vision was meant to be, and I just wrote about my own passion for the film, which probably spent too long writing. And that's kind of how I went about it, yeah.
Fantastic. And how close or far away is the finished film to what you started with, do you think?
Weirdly pretty close, which I was quite surprised by. I think maybe because my vision was quite broad, so it was kind of like anything would work. But I think, I think what I felt like I wanted to do at the start, and what we sort of spoke about as a team at the beginning, is sort of what we executed. And yeah, I didn't really realise that until kind of around TX. I was like, oh, it kind of is what we planned for. So, and what I kind of felt, what I spoke to James about, and everything else kind of is what was in the film. So
fantastic. Well, that's good. I mean, with Netflix, you mentioned, that you were sort of thinking about the Netflix approach in there. It's quite a unusual commission for Netflix in some ways. I mean, firstly with a first-time director, but then also there is that sort of more journalistic aspect to it. And so was there any, not tension, but any sort of like push and pull between Netflix perhaps and the sort of wanting it to be a little bit more like other Netflix things, and then more kind of tension from the sort of the journalistic side of things? How did those things kind of marry up?
Yeah, they sort of gave us a reference film, which was Downfall: The Case of Boeing, and so I watched that. I'd already watched it, and I watched it again when I got the job, and I sort of was trying to see the elements of that film and what they felt Grenfell could align with in that film. And I could sort of see the similarities, to be fair. I wouldn't say there was tension. I was expecting more tension, actually. One thing they kept saying, actually, was like, oh, don't make it too current affairs-y. But actually, it's a current affairs story at the same time. So I think sometimes that was difficult because Grenfell's not a finished story. There's still an ongoing criminal investigation. There's still new news every year sometimes as well. There's still a lot of things happened even this year while we were making it. So it felt like at times you wanted to kind of follow the active story, and that's not what they wanted us to do, which is fine. It wasn't what we set out to do. We knew it was sort of a retrospective film, but I would say that it was kind of trying to take a story that I've only seen really broadcast and make it feel appropriate for a Netflix platform. And I think it was trying to take a lot of the background of Grenfell. There was a lot, there's a lot of us kind of deep in paperwork and research and on the inquiry website and looking at all this stuff. And a lot of it is quite corporate. It's quite lots of paperwork, lots of regulation and legal stuff. And we thought, well, that's not always going to be Netflixy, but it was trying to see what we could take from that's going to really shock people. And eventually we just tried to whittle down all the sort of key revelations that we felt the Grenfell story had. And I think we made like a top 20 or something. We know we couldn't have all 20 in the film, but we thought, okay, there's 20 that are like big, oh my God. And then we're probably going to have half of these. But, and that was just a whittling down process. And then when we did that, we kind of knew how to hook things together and what we wanted to sort of put on screen that we felt would still engage the average Netflix viewer, I guess. Yeah. So they were sort of on board with that. I think they request a lot of stuff at the beginning before you start filming. So I think you have time to sort of plan how you want to go about things, which I needed as a first timer. And then once they sort of were on board with that, I want to say it was straightforward, but it wasn't as awkward or as push and pull as I thought it was going to be.
That's interesting. So you had to sort of lay it all out in quite a lot of detail beforehand. So does that include the sort of that structure of weaving the emotional stories and the investigative stories together?
Yeah. So they wanted obviously a beat sheet, which most broadcasters would want. And I'd had the experience of helping other directors as an experienced producer. I feel like I had been involved in that process, helping and stuff like that, but I'd never done one myself. So when we had to do that, there's a lot to put on paper, and there was a lot of elements, and I think that's when they realised, there's so many elements to the story. They still didn't want us to make it too current affairs-y, but they realised there's actually a lot of, current news to the Grenfell story, and there's a lot of revelation that average audience might not go and look for. So the beat sheet was one thing, and that was one sort of headache. And once they were sort of like okay with that, I was like, okay, thank God they're okay with that. All right, cool, we'll just get on with it. Now, I always knew in the back of my mind, Netflix are big on scripting, and they like things to be scripted beforehand. And they sort of said, oh, we might not need a script, we'll just do a beat sheet. I was like, okay. And then so we carried on, obviously, just doing the beat sheet, and then they wanted a script. It was like, oh, that's going to be stressful. Because I was thinking, like, the Grenfell story is so big, and then I wasn't sure how you then condense it into a script, basically. But obviously, I had a lot of help, and it was a lot of sort of planning. But then once we sort of got that on, I think they sort of bought into the beat sheet and felt like it was strong. But I think sometimes it was, to see that kind of really work, you kind of want to see it in a script form, which we kind of went through different versions of doing that. But in the first version we actually then sent to them was the version they were like, yeah, cool. So I was expecting it to go back and forth. But once we actually sent them a script, like a proper finished script, they were like, okay, cool, we see it. We sort of see what you guys are trying to do.
I mean, it's a difficult process, but it's really helpful to have made a lot of those kind of big decisions before you get into the shooting. And I
think that's exactly with Grenfell. I think it's just there's too many directions you could go into. So I think it wasn't something we could just follow and see where we go. And I know that some people will do it that way, and there's nothing wrong with doing it that way. But I felt like when you're making a retrospective of any film, you have to decide quite early on what you want to leave out, unless it earns its place later on, and you really think actually let's put it in. So I think it was a lot of that, basically, because there's the cladding company, and there's government regulation, there's previous fires in other countries, there's LFB failings, there's a lot of those. There's so many directions to go in, and who we could just spotlight and focus on. But actually, we felt pulling out of it a little bit and just touching on different things in the way that we did was to make it digestible.
So how long did you spend on all of that kind of process? And I imagine also that you're also simultaneously trying to develop relationships with contributors and doing all of that side of things at the same time.
I'd say a few months. I think about 3 months or so. Obviously, there was a bit of work done in development, and so that was helpful to sort of a bounce off point. But I think in terms of the beat sheet and the script, that sort of happened in the first few months of the job, and then we started filming in June. And I think we started doing sort of the beat sheet and the script. I think we sent the script in July. So I think the script came after our first couple of shoots, which they were happy about. But it was okay, because I think the first couple of shoots the script wasn't going to change them. So, and I think the beat sheet we did in May. And I sort of started end of February, but I think we really got going with the beat sheet maybe in April. So it was, about 3 months of doing that sort of planning and prep before we started filming.
And lots of conversations in that time, I imagine, then with contributors or potential
Started
contributors.
to meet a lot of contributors and started to spend a lot more time with our journalist, Pete. Because I think he's someone I think he would have benefited from getting to know me more, because I knew that we were going to probably have to lean on him quite a lot. And I've obviously seen, I've worked on Netflix projects before where you need that sort of a trunk character or a trunk journo, and they have to be quite engaged. And it's a lot to ask someone who hasn't done that much TV before. So a lot of time was spending time with him, getting to know him, meeting contributors, and obviously there's a lot of people to meet, and some people obviously naturally they're happy to speak but don't want to speak for camera, and it was doing a lot of research in that time as well and trying to think who our sort of contribs could be. So that was kind of always going on the side as well.
That must have been quite a difficult process, because obviously there's lots of people potentially to kind of choose from, but in the course of the film you've only got space for a certain number of characters, of key contributors.
Yeah.
So how did you sort of settle on your key contributors from the sort of the victim side?
Yeah, I think there were people that I was familiar with having followed the story. I think one thing we knew we wanted was, a young person. I think having seen a lot of Grenfell projects, I felt like it was a story that's going to affect the younger victims more when it eventually concludes. And I felt like it would be good to have a young voice that felt different, it felt fresh. So that was sort of one of the sort of contributors that we were looking for. But we knew we wanted a range. We wanted someone that maybe was, calling for change before the fire happened. So once we kind of settled on different, let's say, profiles of contributors, then that was kind of not our sole thing of how we went about finding people, but I think we had that in our minds that, we wanted a young person. We might have wanted someone who was like challenging the council or the tenant management organisation, and people, and not everyone having the same point of view as well. Which obviously with Grenfell, when it's affected so many people, it could feel repetitive if everyone is saying the same thing. So it was looking for people who have slightly differing points of view, but some things is helpful if they agree on, and then other things is helpful if they're coming from a different angle of, if Bernie and Jackie and their brother being a disabled resident, that was something they were calling for change a long time before the fire, because Ray was disabled. He walked with a crutch. He couldn't use the stairs at all, but he was stuck on the 22nd floor or 23rd floor. So she was, trying for years to get him moved to the ground floor. Obviously, a lot of that couldn't make it into the film, but, there was a lot of stuff that she was doing long before the fire, which unfortunately, part of that was why contributes to why he died. And, someone like Eddie, who was sort of calling for change for years and years and years. Luana obviously was 19 when we filmed with her. She was 12 when the fire happened. And I think it was interesting and I definitely wanted to get that perspective of a young person. And I think her speaking about all her experiences from the point of view of someone that was 12 at the time, I thought felt new and interesting, and I think would resonate with a wider audience as well. So we wanted a kind of a range of contributors that would speak to different groups of people. So that was sort of always in our mind when we were going about it.
Yeah. And I think like the way that you sort of introduce her as well, with her soundtrack to that summer, and with Ray as well, with his music. Was that something that you'd sort of thought about early on, that kind of sort of let's attach a sort of a character piece of music to these people, or that just sort of emerged?
No, the music kind of came as, well, the interviews were really hard for them and also hard for myself. And I think with music, sometimes it was just a way of taking them out of being upset every now and again. I think with Luana, the music stuff actually was the end of her interview. Her interview was one of the shortest ones, but she was crying quite a lot in her interview. She was really upset. And actually, I think when we spoke about what was like number one at the time, like what, just kind of taking her out of the trauma for a second, and it sort of really warmed her up, and she started singing quite a lot, and she was doing like the mannequin challenge, and I forgot that happened in 2017, and then it was just reminding us of different things of that time. And I think for everyone, we did it with everyone, but not to have it be a bit, but actually sometimes it was just a nice way of warming them up. Some people, we kind of spoke about music quite early on, like what's your favourite music, what's your favourite song, who do you listen to, and they'd be like, why the hell are you asking me that? But actually sometimes it was just like a way of making them feel like it's not all about Grenfell today. You can talk about whatever you want. And I think that helped sort of warm people up and maybe made them feel quite relaxed. And sometimes it took us to places that we didn't know. Obviously, with the song with Ray, that was a song that Ray listened to every day when he was walking his dog and in the morning. And then with Omar, that's a song that him and his brother listened to every morning when they're having a coffee. Luana obviously had named a number of songs that were just part of what she was listening to with her friends when she was in year 8. Eddie had a song that we didn't use in the end, but it was like Marvin Gaye, What's Going On. And when he was playing it in his interview, it was interesting because I knew the song really well, but I didn't know the song that well at the same time. And he was talking about it as protest music, and he was talking about how much of the lyrics resonate with what the Grenfell sort of survivors and victims are going through. And it was interesting that everyone sort of, music was kind of another sort of way of just making the interviews a little bit less intense for them. And then actually in the end, it ended up being quite helpful for us to sort of use that as a way to sort of introduce people.
Yeah, I mean, it serves two sort of quite useful purposes for you, doesn't it? One, to introduce them as characters, but also to tell them in the interview that I'm interested in you as a person and not just as a victim.
Exactly that, yeah.
And how were those conversations? I mean, how did you sort of handle dealing with people who had been through that trauma, and how did you feel that trauma yourself? How did you deal with that?
Yeah, I think I felt like I was going to be comfortable with dealing with it because I felt like I'd worked on lots of intense or sensitive projects in the past. But I actually think nothing was actually compared to this. I worked on like loads of blue lights. I'd worked on sensitive films. I'd worked with people that are victims of trauma, and I felt like it would just be like that. Maybe that was my naivety. I felt like it would just be the same or it'd be similar. And actually, it was far more intense. I think it stayed with me a lot more. I think initial conversations were difficult to have with people. Some people were kind of open to talk about what they went through. And because a lot of them had gone through quite a lot of therapy, they were so open. So sometimes they were talking about things that to them might just sound like nothing because they're healed. But to me, it just sounds really graphic and really explicit. And I was like, oh my God, that sounds awful. But they'd talk about it like it was, just having a chat. And I think that's what I wasn't as prepared for. And that was just our research chats. So I think the research chats were very detailed. But I think it was important to have them because I think people needed to know kind of if we were to interview them, where they might have to go in that interview and what they might have to talk about. And yeah, it was definitely difficult. I won't pretend it was easy. I think it was, it sort of stays with you. I think there's certain people, who, even if it was just a research chat, it felt maybe like a therapy session for them. So it'd really unpack stuff, and then you have to go home, and then you're sort of all that's in your mind is what someone's just said. So there was a lot of that. But I think for me, obviously, it's sort of, I think I was okay. We had a lot of support, but I think it was just, I'd have to do something to sort of take my mind out of that, whether it was listening to cheesy music. I listened to a lot of pop music when I was working on this. Not because I listened to pop music all the time, but I think I needed a bit of S Club and NSYNC, like at times, because I needed to sort of be completely in another space and something that reminds me of me as a child or something, to not be thinking about the fire or thinking about bodies in the stairwell or thinking about that kind of stuff, which I thought was helpful for me. That's kind of how I got through it. But I think, the research chats were difficult, but I think they were necessary. And then once we got to doing the interviews, I was prepared for where they were going to go, as were they. It doesn't mean they were any easier. People obviously got very upset in their interviews. I think every single person got upset in their interview, but at least it was something that we were all prepared for.
Yeah. I mean, for me, one of the difficult parts in that kind of process is when you've spoken to people for a research chat and you've had a big, long conversation and, and it feels like people have shared a lot of stuff. And then you have to say, I'm really sorry, but we're not going to film with you or include you in the film. And did you film with everybody or did you use everybody that you filmed, or, what was that kind of ratio and how did those conversations go?
I think other than one person who wasn't a survivor or a victim, everyone we filmed with is in the film. I think with research chats, we had a lot of research chats. And sometimes, I think with the research chats, I never told anyone they were going to be filmed. I think that was really important to sort of have that sort of caveat at the beginning, like, this is a research chat. Obviously, it's a research chat, but they're seeing it as, oh, it's Netflix talking to me about something. They naturally still think they're going to be filmed, regardless of whatever caveats you gave at the beginning. So I think that was difficult when that's just not going to happen. And I think a lot of people were very, very, very keen to tell their story. But sometimes for me, and maybe it was the producer in me, a little bit. I didn't always think people were appropriate for camera. So there's people that we spoke to who I just felt like you can't be on camera, you know? And even though they really wanted to be on camera, they really wanted to speak about what they went through, I just felt like I don't think it's beneficial to that person to take part in a documentary. But you can't tell someone that, you know, in that way. You can't say, I think you're still too traumatized. Everyone is traumatized because that's what they'll say. Everyone's traumatized. But I just didn't think, for me anyway, as a duty of care, that hat on, I just felt like it wouldn't have been appropriate to film everyone. And I think what we wanted to avoid doing very early on is speaking to too many people and raising expectations of too many people, and then suddenly there's like 70 people waiting to be filmed. It wouldn't have been appropriate, and I think it would have upset a lot of people, and it would upset the community. I think the research chats were really important to have, but when it came to engaging with filming, we did that very minimally on purpose. There was probably a couple of people who I felt like I did want to film at one point, and then I think as you keep talking to people and they're sort of telling you stuff that's quite alarming, you're like, actually, it's probably not going to be the best idea to film with you. So there wasn't as many sort of letdowns, so to speak, as you'd expect, but I think there was still a lot of people who were disappointed or upset that they weren't filmed, because I think a lot of people in this space, there's so many victims, there's a lot of survivors, there's a lot of bereaved families. And in the immediate community as well, a lot of people in the immediate community as well who might have lived in a block next to Grenfell who felt like they heard and saw people dying and they felt they got a story to tell. So there was a lot of that too. And I think you can't help but feel like you're going to let someone down or let a lot of people down. And there was a lot of that as well. But I think overall, once we got towards the end, people understood why we kind of went about it the way we did.
Yeah, I think on that note, one of the things that was interesting for me, I think, watching it was obviously we think of trauma as often, you know, kind of being solely associated with victims. Mm-hmm. But I think the way that you humanised the stories of the firefighters in this was really powerful as well, because often, you know, kind of emergency care workers aren't really kind of thought of as being victims of trauma as well. And I thought that came across very well.
Thank you.
So when you actually kind of started heading towards filming these people, obviously with Netflix there's a certain level of sort of production expectation in you know, kind of how things are going to look, how the sort of, you know, and that entails a kind of a certain scale to the crews and to the teams. How did you kind of manage that? And, you know, kind of you're also trying to get that intimacy and that kind of care, and yet, you know, you've got to sort of bring that sort of Netflix level of production to it. Tell me about the shoots a little bit.
Yeah, so before we film, and I'm sure it's many broadcasters ask for this, but Netflix always asks for what they call a lookbook. I'd known that from working on a Netflix project before as a senior producer, where my directors were doing a lookbook and it was stressing them out. So I knew it wasn't a straightforward thing, but I think that actually was one of the fun parts. Actually, I think pre-filming that I particularly enjoyed doing a lookbook. I think it's obviously more fun than doing a script. So it was kind of showing them how I want it to look. I think with everything was sort of fine actually until I think it was the only thing that they were sort of debating was how we wanted the interviews to look for our bereaved and survivors, because I think a lot of films sometimes film people who've been affected by trauma in a very blank space, and I think they were like, oh, maybe we could do them against like a very blank backdrop or something very Once Upon a Time, which obviously is brilliant films. And I was like, yeah. But I personally worried, and it was probably more my worry than anyone else's, that it was just kind of writing victim on their forehead if we did it that way. And I wanted to sort of humanize everyone in the way we could. I wanted everyone to feel, and also wanted them to come into the interview setup and feel comfortable and feel like it's their space. So it was very, very precise, actually, how we wanted interviews to look. Because whether it was Theresa May's interview or it was Luana's interview, we wanted someone to step in and feel like they're in their space or adjacent to their space. So the lookbook, that's kind of what we planned. So we sort of planned, at that time doing the lookbook, we didn't know who our characters was necessarily going to be, but we sort of knew we were going to have victims and bereaved and survivors. We were going to have journalists or experts or whistleblowers or similar. We knew we were probably going to have firefighters. So we just sort of plotted out different shot styles that we could have, and it's quite similar to what we ended up sort of doing, so which I was quite pleased with. And then also how we wanted everyone's sort of visuals or B-roll, that sort of filming to look as well. So it was all kind of planned out. And I was working with a DOP that was new to Netflix as well. So I was new and then he was new. So that was a bit kind of like, maybe there was, not that they vocalized it, maybe there was a bit of anxiety there. But for me as a new director, I think it was really important for me to work with a DOP who would respect that I'm a new director as well. And I'd have my own ideas, and not to say that my idea is the only idea, but it was that I'm going to mess up at one point, or I'm not going to get everything right. I'm not going to know everything. It's impossible to know everything when you're doing something for the first time. And they'd be patient with me. So I think I wanted someone that I didn't even know him that well, but I knew him enough. And they were sort of like, okay, what about this list of people? And it was like, yeah, but in the end, they were fine with it. And I think also I had to convince him of the lookbook too, because he might think like, oh, I've worked with other directors that wouldn't do something like this, and maybe you should think like this. And actually, it was fine in the end, and it sort of worked out in the best way. And once we started filming and we showed them some sort of shots of examples of what we've done so far, and they were like, okay, cool. And I think that's when they were sort of like, okay, as you were.
And when you said that they were in their own spaces or adjacent, were you actually on location in their spaces?
No one. A lot of those were just created. Sometimes it was like a community hall. We made it look more homely. Luana was actually shot in a college in Peckham, which had a nice kind of common room. And we just it was very bare though, so we just kind of put stuff around to make it look less bare. Theresa May's was an empty room, so we had to create something out of that. It was like an unused hall space in Temple. And so a lot of people's shots were created. One of our firefighters, we had a location booked for one of our firefighters, and the venue sort of cancelled on us like 2 days before his interview, saying, we're just worried it's going to be too political. And I was like, you can't convince him it's not going to be, because obviously it's Grenfell. It is political. So we had a massive scramble because we felt we couldn't cancel him because it took him a while to agree to be filmed. So we're like, where the hell are we going to film a firefighter and make it look like how we promised it was going to look in the lookbook? So sort of scrambling on Gumtree looking for empty warehouses. And I asked my production coordinator, do you think you can get me a fire truck? And then she was like, what? And actually she was like, I can call around. Because I said, no, but they get used for dramas and stuff. So surely someone has like a fire truck, unless it's really expensive. If it's really expensive, then leave it. We'll just have to just cancel. And she called around, and then she said, I think I've got a truck. I said, okay, cool. I need to find a warehouse then that truck can drive into, and we have to just create something. So Chris's look was very last minute, just trying to create something. So we just ordered a uniform from eBay, and we got a truck that came in. Luckily, just about fit into the warehouse. And it was all really weird, but actually some of it was just kind of. Some of the last minute ones were more fun because we had to just really think on our feet. I found this warehouse in Clapton. I've never been to Clapton before. I've lived in London my whole life. And then the guy was he was a really interesting character, and he just didn't know what the hell was going on. And he was like, well, why do you need to bring a fire truck inside? And it was all a bit weird to explain and get permission, but he sort of said yes very late. And then the next day we were filming. So then it was a bit crazy. But all the spaces were kind of with the people in mind. But sometimes it was not straightforward making them those spaces. Yeah.
That sounds like a stressful few days.
Yeah, it was a little bit, yeah.
So did you have like an art department team on that? Or
No.
Wow, for none of them?
No. We had the recon. I think there were no, there wasn't an art director. We never had an art director, no. But the recon, we had like a bigger crew. But I think for with everyone's interviews, it was just planning. Because I was quite precise with the props list. And then it's just trial and error for a couple of hours before someone arrives. But when I say that, I'm quite, not like OCD or anything, but I just plan stuff in a certain way, and then we'll just try it out. If it doesn't work, we just ordered like plan Bs and plan C. So if something doesn't look right on camera, we could move things around and change things around. So some shots, even though it was the space was already set, it took a long time to make look right. So for like Pete's interview, that was a working office. It was like an accounting firm or something, but it was, because of an accounting firm, we had to take everything away because it was confidential information, and then reclutter it to look like he works there, which was actually harder than we would think, because we had to take all the paperwork away and then put fake paperwork and then put coffees on the table and put all this stuff to look like that's his working space. Yeah.
I was wondering what was on the screen, what it said on the screen.
Yeah, I think it was something from the inquiry. It was something that felt safe to have on a screen in case anyone zoomed in. So, but it was that level of precision that we had to do sometimes. And some of them were straightforward. Like with Chris, it was just a truck some stuff on the wall and some uniform on a, well, I say on a railing. The railing was black and I wanted it to be red. So we spray and play. So we got it from IKEA. We just made it red. But some of it was really straightforward. I think the team were really on board with that. I think when everyone's working on something as sort of mentally taxing as and difficult as Grenfell, sometimes the sort of fun stuff was just our shoot setups. And whenever we came to a shoot, it was kind of, we all had fun with it. We ordered a lot of props sometimes before a shoot. Everyone had to get deliveries to come to the house. We'd have to come in with bags of stuff. And then we just try and create something. And that felt like, actually, because we knew the rest of the day wasn't going to be a laugh, obviously. So trying to create some shots and look for what we sort of set out to do. We had like a little mood board and stuff, but then at trying it out and seeing how it looks on camera. And then sometimes it was the wrong mug or sometimes it was the wrong sticker in the background, but then we just change things around.
I think that's a really like important kind of approach to things, really, like especially when you're doing kind of traumatic films, that the process, and for the people who are involved behind the camera, you know, that you need to make the process for them fun to balance out. And I don't mean fun as in like everybody's laughing all the time, but you know what I mean? Like, I think that is a really important thing, is to try and keep that kind of
definitely, because it was like, you know, I'm sure they won't mind me saying, we all struggled at times. And even before we started filming, just reading witness statements were really hard. Some of the witness statements were so graphic and so just so hard to read. And I thought, how are we going to turn this into someone's interview or whatever? And it was even just everyone reading statements people struggled with, and we'd have to take a break, go for a walk or something like that. So it was always difficult. And I had quite a young team as well. And some people in my team were quite new to either documentary or they were new to their roles. So a lot of us were sort of finding our feet. And I think then you're finding your feet on a very emotionally heavy subject as well. So yeah, it was really important that when there was opportunities to have a bit of a laugh or enjoy something more, because it's not enjoyable to read witness statements, but it might be enjoyable to see if it's going to be a red mug or a black mug or something like that, and try different things out. And I think everyone sort of got stuck into prop finding. Sometimes we had to do them really last minute. So yeah, that was sort of something I always had in mind, because I'm trying to look after myself, obviously, but I also felt like I'm very aware of having to, you know, look after my team and also speak to my execs and make sure that they know how I'm feeling. And then, you know, because it was a very emotional project to work on. So it was always trying to pay attention to that too.
Yeah, it can be hard sometimes managing your own emotions when you've got to kind of deliver up and look after everybody below.
Exactly,
it's hard sometimes, definitely. So with the recon, like what stage in the process did you start kind of really honing in on what you wanted to do, how you wanted to do that? Was that deep in the edit, or was that like in the script at the beginning?
Yeah, so the recon was in the script, but there was a lot more recon, I think, in the script than we ended up doing in the end. I think because some recon you would get recon ideas from people's interviews as well. Some things that they'd say, you'd think, oh, that could be good to visualize. And there were some things that we were on the fence about for a very long time. I think smoke was one of them. I think we knew that smoke had claimed a lot of lives. A lot of people died in the stairwell. So kind of visualizing smoke and the stairwell was something that was a long debate between us and Netflix. So we just knew that we'll just keep waiting, and there was no rush to make that decision, but it's something that we planned for. But whether we were going to execute that was TBC, because I think some people felt like, oh, that's probably too much, and some thought, oh, it's probably fine. And I think that sort of towing the line went on for quite a while. So we just knew that actually we're going to just push the recon further back, because it's very expensive to do recon. I didn't realize how expensive it was until I did it myself. And then so you don't want to kind of do that wrong or overdo it. So it's kind of like, okay, we'll do it when it's most informed. And it felt like at a later stage in the edit, that's when the recon was going to be most informed, and we'd have to be very kind of precise on committing to what we're not going to do and committing to what we were going to do. So then we sort of committed that, okay, we're going to do different things with the stairwell. So we shot loads of different versions of stairwell recon. Smoke we didn't do too much because it was quite toxic to be in it. So we kind of had to commit to a style of how to do the smoke, and then just that's the only option we're going to have. Also, it's very hard to find places that would let you fill a space with smoke, because it was quite dark or quite thick smoke. So some places would say it's going to damage their building or something like that. So it was quite hard to do that. So when we did find someone that would do it, we just thought we'd do it really quickly. And And then other things were straightforward. We always knew we were going to do, like the control room. We were always going to do, because we there's no, obviously that's not filmed. You have to visualize that space. We did hope to have an interviewee from the control room to help with that, but that didn't really come off in the end. So then, luckily though, there was so much radio chatter. There were so many witness statements that we kind of knew, and there's so much research that the team had done as well. So we sort of knew what the control room was going to look like. And then we were able to kind of sort of create that. So that was more straightforward, yeah.
I've got a really geeky question
Yeah.
here for that. So this control room screens,
Yeah.
you've actually got like the interface.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
How
So
did you do
yeah, do
that?
you know, we worked with October Studios with that, and even I was amazed because I basically I wanted it to feel as real as possible. So obviously, I've worked on loads of blue light shows. I've been in a control room, so I knew what the control room looked like. I know what kind of things they have on their screens. It was hard, obviously, to get the screens that the Grenfell call handlers had because we didn't have access to that. So I remember I sent sort of loads of screenshots to October of like examples of what London Ambulance Service screen would look like, or West Midlands or whatever, that kind of stuff, and said, oh, this is the kind of thing they have on their screens when something's happening, but we want it to be Grenfell. So it's kind of, we want it to be accurate to what was actually happening. And obviously we knew from like Pete's research and we knew from the inquiry roughly what was happening. We had loads of logs and stuff, but all of that was just paperwork. There was nothing visual. So it was kind of like, here's sort of the information, and that's kind of how we want it to look. So is there someone that can do that? And they said, oh, we think we've got a graphics guy who can try something. So on his first attempt of trying something, that's kind of what he put together. It was just different charts and heat maps and stuff like that. So it was ended up feeling very real, and it was almost like too real. Because I remember when when people watched it, people were like, how did you access the control room? And we're like, that wasn't the control room, but I think what was on screen felt quite like accurate to what is usually on screen in emergency control rooms. So that was created by October's team, yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, absolutely kind of testament to your attention to detail there, because it felt
Probably
very
quite
convincing.
annoying, but I think it pays off sometimes, and other times it probably doesn't. But I felt like it was like, I didn't want it to feel like, because I know what I'm like when I watch stuff, so I didn't want people to be like, that would never happen. Whereas I feel like, because I've worked with so many emergency services, I feel like I knew roughly what was on their screens. It would never be accurate, and we weren't trying to make it verbatim, but we wanted to make it feel real. In case people were going to look at the screen and not the person, it was just kind of anything to kind of add attention, add more detail to fast action. Because at the end of the day, it's people just on the phone, so you want to kind of make that feel like something.
It's that kind of balancing act, isn't it, between making it sort of feel dramatic, but also making it feel realistic.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how long did you have to do all the recon then?
The control room was done in a day. We had planned it. It was all that came really late. Actually, that one was quite stressful because we had spaces before. It was hard to find a space that was appropriate for that kind of filming. I thought we could just find like an IT room, and actually everyone was like, that's just not possible. So we needed October to kind of create the space for us. But the recon, like the control room, was 1 day of filming. The sort of conference was half a day. It was like a morning in somewhere near Soho, like a sort of conference room. And the stairwell stuff actually took the longest because I think there were so many iterations of that. So then we did the conference and the smoke on the same day, and then the stairwell stuff was another day by itself. So actually we didn't have loads of days of recon, but it was kind of, so we had to max out those days. They were quite long days. Yeah.
Wow. I think I'm being given, I can see, we moving over now to the audience. Thank you. I mean, I could
thank you.
keep talking. There's loads of other things I wanted to talk to you about, but I'm aware that we've got a room full of people here who probably also want to talk to you. So is there anyone who would like to ask a question? Yes.
In terms of the work you'd done before, what was the best preparation that you had to do this, and what was the most important support you had from Netflix and Rogan while you were doing it?
I think in terms of the work I'd done before, one thing that was helpful is that, not work-wise, but I had watched a lot of Netflix. I think it's important to sort of know who you're working for and what they like and what they don't like. And I think, so I feel like I understood that from a viewer's point of view, and it was sort of turning that into active usage instead of just like, oh, as an audience member, I think this and I think that. So I'd worked on like sensitive films before and sensitive projects. So I felt like I had the experience of this was going to be very sensitive. So that I felt like I brought with me. And I feel like I worked on things that had a range of contributors. But some were young, some were traumatized, some were high profile talent, so to speak. So then I was very comfortable with the range of contributors that this might have had. So I think that I kind of brought that into the job as well. And I think in terms of support, like my execs were really supportive. Sandy, who's here, was sort of like someone who I bounced off with a lot, who I think, you know, has a very journalistic background, which is not something that I had a lot of actually on my CV. So I think that was really helpful to feel like I was sort of in safe hands in terms of like the journalism will get there. There's a lot of it to do. And Rogan as a whole, obviously, you know, I'd worked there before. They trusted me with a very big step up. And Netflix, I think, obviously we speak to them every couple of weeks. It's like you could have bi-weekly meetings with Netflix. But what was helpful was that I think more or less, not from the start, but near the beginning, they sort of treated me like I was a director, not a first-time director. So I think I was forced to get out of my head of being a first-timer and being like, oh, imposter syndrome, oh my God, what am I doing? Because there was no time to do that. You kind of had to be like, you're doing it now. You've been given the job, so you have to do the job. And I think them just sort of treating me normal was actually what made it a lot easier. Yeah.
Anyone else?
During the edit, how much input did they have? Were there a lot of cuts, or because you had the script, was that quite straightforward?
Yeah, I think the script was really helpful to get us started. I think loads of editors don't love working with scripts, but I think for something like this, we needed to have some sort of framework, because the story of Grenfell is so broad, and you can make various versions of a Grenfell film, and people still will make various versions of a Grenfell film. So I think where we decided kind of what we wanted to leave out and what we wanted to keep in, we kind of had to put that on a timeline to start with, and that made the start of the edit a lot quicker. And we sort of got, you know, I would say we got through Acts 1 and 2 because we had to kind of do it in 3 parts really quickly. And I think, not really quickly as in it was finished really quickly, but Netflix actually asked for an early viewing. And I think it was like a month before we were meant to show them a first version of something. So because we had that kind of planning and scripting done, and we sort of followed that a bit, we showed them kind of Acts 1 and 2 quite early, a rough version, and they were really pleased with that actually. I think that made the rest of the edit feel like, okay, we're on the right track. It's going to be difficult, and there wasn't really a bottomed out Act 3, because I guess in real life the story of Grenfell hasn't finished, so there was no clean like here's how it's going to finish, because it hasn't finished. But I guess in the end, the ending was that there isn't an ending, and there is people still calling for justice. So they gave feedback, and their feedback was always quite clear. I actually think the way they give notes quite straightforward. So obviously there was notes from my execs, but then also there's notes from Netflix that would come after each cut, quite quickly after each cut as well. So you weren't kind of waiting too long for it. And I think 90% of the time it was pretty much like, yeah, that's straightforward. And actually what was good about them, I don't know if it was because of this particular project or they're always like this, maybe they're not always like this, but when I didn't agree with them about a note, I just said I didn't agree. And there wasn't this big kind of argument. It was actually kind of like, just show us the version of something as to why you don't agree, and show us what it would look like otherwise. And they were quite open, I think. And I think I was expecting them to be a lot more intense and a lot more sort of maybe micromanagey when it got to the edit, and they weren't like that.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, I was quite surprised, yeah.
I'd like to thank both Olaide and Toby for this in conversation. Please join me in a round of applause.
This podcast was recorded at a Directors UK member event. You can hear plenty more Directors in Conversation by subscribing on the usual streaming platforms. Follow us on social media and find out more about us at directors.uk.com.